Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Mojave ball python. And if you've been in ball pythons even for a little while, you probably heard of the Mojave. And it's one of the ones that have been around probably almost since the beginning. It's been around for almost 20 years, pretty much on the tail of the Albino and the Pinstripe and the Coral Glow and stuff like that. It came out really early in the game, produced for the very first time by the Snake Keeper. And I'd say there has been quite an incredible amount of combos made with the Mojave. We really can see the potential of the Mojave and what we can really see in combos. And I would say if you're looking at different combos and different genes, I would say every gene kind of has its own specialty. For example, I would say probably the Leopard is probably the king of combos. And I would say like the bamboo around my neck, this is probably one of the best standalone morphs that look really impressive by itself. And if you'd ask me what I would think of the Mojave as far as just a gene by itself, I would say it mixes pretty well with a lot of stuff, but I would say where it really excels is that it makes some really impressive combos that you can't really make with any other gene. I would say it's probably more of a specialty snake. It has some really unique specialties that look really impressive, that when you see it you go, oh yeah, that is a Mojave combo, and nothing else really looks like it. So today I'm going to bring you over to the internet and I want to show you the potential of the Mojave. Alright, so I'm going to start over here on the world of ball pythons, and this pretty much is the place if you want to look at individual morphs. I pretty much jump back and forth between the world of ball pythons and Warf Market because they have some really good examples of the different morphs in a lot of pictures. So right here, this is essentially what a Mojave looks like. And the first thing I've noticed about the Mojave, if you kind of scroll through the pictures, you'll notice it is pretty polymorphic. It's actually quite a bit of difference from one Mojave to another, and I think it's really line specific. Some lines are a lot brighter, some are a little bit duller, some actually are really reduced, and some have a lot of kind of these keyhole patterns on the sides. Essentially the alien heads of the normal is reduced to kind of like a keyhole that you kind of put a skeleton key in the Mojave. And sometimes like this, it almost has like floating alien heads. It's kind of interesting, and that is usually the characteristic of the Mojaves and the Mojave combos. And I would say probably the #1 most impressive snake that I've produced at any of the reptile shows. I probably sold snakes at maybe 8 or 9 different reptile shows over the last few years. And I would say everyone comes up to my table and they say, hey, can I hold the white snake? As a matter of fact, I don't have Mojave in my collection. I don't have a super Mojave, but it is part of the blue-eyed leucistic, which is a white snake with blue eyes. And I actually produced one with my bamboo, crossed it with a lesser, got a blue-eyed leucistic. It almost looks exactly like this. I would say my particular snake has kind of a yellow line right down the back. And the interesting thing about the super Mojave is if you're looking for an all-white snake, a lot of times the super Mojave will actually have kind of a grayed out head, which is really interesting as far as a blue-eyed leucistic. So I'd say if you're looking for the perfect blue-eyed leucistic, a lot of people will say what you really want is you want a Mojave lesser, because if you get the super Mojave, it kind of has this faded out head. If you get a super lesser, it actually can have bug eyes, which are like bigger than normal eyes. Sometimes they can look really weird, and I would say probably the best combo that I've seen as far as just a stark white snake, bright blue eyes, normal size eyes, that would be the Mojave lesser. So if we're talking about specialty snakes, I would say it really excels when you mix it with the GHI. There's nothing really that looks like the Mojave GHI. This is a GHI, essentially what it is. It's a dark snake with kind of a jumbled up pattern. But the interesting thing is when you mix them up, you don't end up with a jumbled up pattern. You end up with this crazy looking snake. It's quite impressive. And sometimes it's like a really almost a fluorescent line right down the back of a black snake. And if you see them in person, they actually look like this. It is pretty amazing. This probably isn't really photoshopped on this particular picture. It is probably one of the most amazing combos that I've ever seen. As a matter of fact, you walk up to someone's table and you see pretty much a black snake with this kind of fluorescent line down the back. You know right away it's got to be the Mojave GHI, which is pretty interesting. So here's another thing that mixes really well with as a kind of a specialty gene. The Mystic's kind of interesting because it's actually considered to be in the blue-eyed leucistic, although it doesn't make a white snake when you mix it with the Mojave. And this is what you get when you mix the two together. Let me tell you, it doesn't look anything like either parent. This is what you get. You get what's called a Mystic Potion, which is a Mojave Mystic. As a matter of fact, I almost bought into some of these projects when I first got into ball pythons, and then I realized when you breed the Mojave Mystic, you end up with snakes. It's almost impossible for the layman to tell the difference between the Mystic and the Mojave. They look really similar, and I thought, you know, I'm not sure I really want to get into kind of the morphs that are really hard to differentiate. And that's kind of what got me out of the project, and that's kind of what got me out of like the highways and the freeways with the asphalt and the yellow belly, or the gravel and the yellow belly. It's like you really can't tell the difference between them, and they look really close to normals. And I think that's kind of what shies a lot of people away from a lot of these projects. But hey, if you're just looking for a pet snake that looks really impressive, the Mojave Mystic or the Mystic Potion, this is an awesome snake. So here is, I kind of wanted to go through some of these other ones like the Spider and just kind of see what, you know, it's the base morphs of the Mojave mixed with some of the most common genes in the ball python breeding industry, kind of what the general consensus is as far as breeding it across the board with a lot of pretty much your most common genes. And I'd say Spider is one of the most common. It's been out pretty much since the beginning. I think this has probably been out since the beginning. Probably almost came out at the same time as Mojave. Here is what Mojave does to the Spider. It's pretty impressive. I would say you can see a little bit of the Spider coming through and pretty much more of the Mojave in this case. It almost trumps the Spider, which is pretty amazing because Spider usually trumps a lot of other morphs when you mix them together. Usually you can see the Spider more than some of the other genes that you mix in with it. So here's a Firefly. This is probably one of my favorite snakes as far as a bright yellow snake with really high contrast. This is the fire and the pastel. And I always like to see what things can really affect the Firefly to see if it can make it look better or if it'll actually look worse. And this is what happens when you put the Mojave on top of the Firefly. It's interesting. It really jumbles up the pattern, kind of fades it out a little bit, which is kind of unique for a morph like this, to actually take the Firefly and change it into this. This is pretty interesting. I wouldn't have really expected that it would have faded it out quite as much as you see it faded out here. So here's the banana. You know, the banana's been around since the beginning too. This is like the bread and butter of the ball python industries pretty much for the last 20 years. Banana's really a common morph now. They used to be really expensive. Now you can pick them up for usually just a few $100. And the thing with the banana is it really dominates a lot of genes. It's really hard to mix stuff with the banana and actually see some of the stuff in the banana. So I kind of wanted to show you what the Mojave does to the banana, and it's actually quite impressive as far as what it's doing to the banana. A lot of times you really can't see that much of an impact, and I'd say it's changing it quite a bit. It's given some lightening on the side. You can definitely tell it's still a banana. The banana is really strong. And I also wanted to show you right here, I'd say it's not really fair because banana trumps a lot of other genes. As a matter of fact, I just bought a snake. I actually just put a down payment on a snake, and I'm waiting to pay the rest off after the upcoming reptile show. As a matter of fact, the next show is October 19th and 20th, 2019. I think it's like 4 weeks away, and hopefully I'll see you there. It'll be pretty interesting. I'm just doing one show this year. I used to try to do all the reptile shows, and let me tell you, it is a lot of work just setting up and standing there for a whole weekend on top of a busy schedule. But I definitely wanted to go to at least one show, and I decided this fall that I wanted to go to the Denver Repticon, so that'll be pretty interesting. So actually, I actually bought this snake with the money I'm expecting from the sale of my hatchlings at the Repticon, and I wanted to show you this because it is a pretty impressive snake. Take a look at this. This is a pastel Calico banana enchi butter yellow belly. It's actually a 6 gene combo, and the reason I wanted to show you this is because with all those 6 genes, you can definitely tell it's still a banana with everything on top. Banana's trumping almost all of these genes, and you can tell it's a banana on top of everything else. If you're wondering how much I actually paid for this crazy snake, this thing was actually $850. It is going to be a super awesome breeder. Even if I breed it to a normal, I'll get like snakes coming out that'll all be different, probably from every single clutch over the next few years. It'll be a pretty awesome breeder. I'm pretty excited about that one. So let's go back to Mojave. I'm actually looking at the albino, and the interesting thing is, I just kind of threw this out there, the albino, it doesn't really have a strong impact with the albino. I thought that was kind of interesting. But the other thing I noticed on this particular picture is this Mojave albino almost looks like it has an iridescent sheen to it. And this is really the first example that I've seen. As a matter of fact, I had one of my viewers under my videos and comment say, hey, I just bought this ball python and it looks iridescent. As a matter of fact, I think that is pretty unusual for a ball python to actually have an iridescent sheen. You've seen it in like a lot of the rainbow boas or like the golden child reticulated pythons. Certain morphs have that kind of an iridescent sheen, but to date I haven't actually seen it in ball pythons. So it was kind of interesting that I heard mention of it in one of the comment sections, and I'm also seeing it in this combo too. It'd be interesting if you could actually prove it out genetic. Maybe it's something underneath, or maybe it's even recessive, an iridescent kind of a gene. That would be interesting. So here's the Calico. The Calico, I'd say, is another one that's really good with combos. I love everything in Calico. As a matter of fact, I produced a bamboo Calico that's probably the most awesome snake in my whole collection. It's really awesome. Calico is an awesome gene. And you mix Mojave with Calico and look what you get. This is a really impressive, I'd say anything you mix with Calico is really good, including Mojave. It works really well. So this one is the Leopard, and I'd say this is another one. The Leopard is pretty much the king of combos. It's always interesting to see what different morphs actually do when combined with the Leopard. The Leopard usually has a really strong effect. And take a look at this. This is the Leopard Mojave. Let me tell you, if I got a Mojave, I would definitely get into Leopard and GHI and Mystic and start cranking out some of these really awesome snakes. I think those are probably the 4 that I've seen so far that are really impressive. So this is the lesser, and of course the lesser is in the blue-eyed leucistic, and if you breed it with the Mojave, you guessed it, it's an all-white snake, and I would say this is probably the king of the blue-eyed leucistics. If you're looking for a really awesome snake, I would say the lesser Mojave is probably the purest white blue-eyed leucistic that you can find. Here's the fire gene. I actually produced some fires this year for the first time. The fire is pretty awesome. And the funny thing is, if you cross a fire with a fire, you get a super fire, which is an all-white snake with black eyes. And if you cross a Mojave with a Mojave, you get an all-white snake with blue eyes. You would think if you cross them together, you'd actually get a white snake, but actually, you actually don't, because one's in the blue-eyed leucistic and the other one, like the super fire with black eyes, it's I don't know if they actually consider it a black-eyed leucistic. It's just kind of an unusual morph. Sometimes when you mix certain genes together, you can actually get an all-white snake with black eyes like the fire. So the enchi is kind of interesting. The enchi is, I would say it's really polymorphic too. Sometimes you can have a lot of, essentially what it does is it reduces the pattern of the ball python. Sometimes you can get a lot of reduction in pattern, and sometimes it only reduces it a little bit. Instead of these tiny little lines, sometimes you get really thick lines, and I've seen a lot of enchis where essentially all they do is kind of eliminate the alien heads on the snake, and it still kind of looks normal. But if you mix the enchi with the Mojave, it's interesting how this works together. I've seen quite a few examples of this, and it looks like nothing that I would ever expect mixing the genes together. It doesn't really reduce it like you would expect an enchi. It actually brightens it and gives it a higher contrast and brings the color up from the belly. It is pretty awesome. I'd say this is probably one of my favorite combos with the Mojave. So So this is the special. This is another one that's kind of special. You can actually mix it with a hobby and take a look at this. This is the snake I almost bought for my very first snake. As a matter of fact, I saw one of these. This is actually called the Crystal, and I saw one of these crystals and it was like $800, and I was like ready to buy it until I looked into breeding the crystal. And the problem is it's another one of those kind of like the highway and the freeway. You breed it to something and you really can't tell much of a difference between the specials and the Mojaves and the normals. They're all not really impressive looking base morphs. And I would say if you're starting out with a breeding operation and you're starting with a whole bunch of normal females, you probably don't want to, you know, invest in some stuff to where your whole display case is going to look like almost, you know, slight variations of a normal. I'd say if you're starting out, you probably want to mix it up and have some really interesting codoms. And if you can actually have multi-gene snakes, if you can get, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 genes and then mix it with something like this, you can get some really crazy combos. That would be where this would really excel, I would think. So this is the spot nose. I'd say the spot nose is kind of an interesting morph. It works really well with clown, and if you mix it with Mojave, it's an interesting snake. You can definitely tell the Mojave enhances the spot nose. So I would say, you know, if you're mixing it with clown, the spot nose clown is really cool. It'd be interesting to see what the Mojave spot nose clown would look like. And you start, you know, you start mixing spot nose with all these different things, and then you think about Mojave. Hey, this enhances this gene. What can I stack on top to make it even more impressive? So this is the yellow belly. I'd say the yellow belly is kind of tough for me too. I have a hard time distinguishing the yellow belly from a normal. It's really tough. You can see, I was actually looking at some videos on YouTube today, and they're like, oh yeah, you have some kind of checkering on the sides. Sometimes you have a yellow belly, and sometimes the belly is not yellow. Sometimes you have flaming coming up the side. Sometimes it's white, sometimes it's yellow, and sometimes you really can't tell how much the difference between a yellow belly and a normal. And it's I'd say as a base morph, it's really confusing. But if you mix it with stuff, take a look at this. This is the Mojave yellow belly, and you can see a dramatic effect. I would say yellow belly is kind of like the hidden gem out there in the ball python industry. People see yellow bellies and they're like, that's not really impressive, until you start mixing it with stuff like Mojave, and just pretty much everything with yellow belly increases the brightness and the contrast. It is pretty incredible. And I really like how it's lighter on the bottom and more yellow on the top. This is probably one of the best combos. I would probably make a list, you know, with the fire and the yellow belly, and kind of stack those on top of other combos to get some really impressive stuff. So I was over here at Warf Market looking at the total number of Mojaves for sale, and you know, they have probably 100,000 plus snakes that have been posted and sold and pretty much for sale in here. So this is kind of sorting just by the Mojave and just the ones that are for sale, and they still have over 1,000 snakes, which is pretty good. And then I actually went over here and looked at the total number of Mojaves that have been on here. Of course, you know, the Mojave's been around for a long time, so I'm guessing the Mojave's been on Warf Market pretty much since the very beginning of the creation of Warf Market. So it's kind of had the time is an advantage to actually have that many snakes on here. But there's actually been 8,755 combinations of Mojave over here on Warf Market. And I would say it's probably the bread and butter of the ball python industry. If you don't have Mojave, I would highly recommend jumping in and getting Mojave. Alright, so it is time for the question of the day. And Axel Caquius asks, what is my favorite dark side morph combo? And I'm not really into the dark morphs. I'd say I'm more of a light morph kind of guy. But if I was just to get one combo in the dark morph, probably what I would choose, probably, if I can almost guarantee, hands down, it would definitely be a Mojave GHI. It's definitely probably the most impressive dark side morph combo that I have ever seen. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.